Constitutional Conversations is a series of discussions by America's leading scholars about the principles, framing, ratification, and implementation of constitutional government in the United States. This series is hosted by the James Madison Memorial Fellowship Foundation of Alexandria, Virginia.
James Madison was at the center of the creation of the First Amendment. He had had a lifelong affinity for religious liberty. He was a strong religious libertarian, we might say. And following the ratification of the Constitution, Madison, having helped father that document, we call him the father of the Constitution for good reason, wanted to take part in that new government. He wanted to sit in that first federal Congress. But politics being what it was in those days, the most influential political actor in Virginia was Patrick Henry. And Henry and Madison were on the outs. Henry made sure that Madison was not going to be appointed to the Senate. So that left him the House of Representatives. And the Henryites ran a very compelling candidate against Madison, and his name was James Monroe. Monroe was later to succeed Madison as President of the United States. But at this time, they were political opponents. Madison was small. He had a very weak voice. He wasn't a powerful presence. Monroe was tall, authoritative looking. He was a war hero. In fact, he'd been wounded during the Revolution in New Jersey. And if you're familiar with that idealistic painting by Emanuel Leutze of Washington crossing the Delaware, it's James Monroe who was holding the American flag there. So in order to be the best candidate he could be against James Monroe, Madison had to shift his position on the Bill of Rights. Initially, during the Constitutional Convention and in the Virginia Ratifying Convention, Madison was opposed to a national Bill of Rights. He thought it was inappropriate and even dangerous, for reasons we'll get to in a moment. And during their contest for the House of Representatives from Virginia, Monroe hinted that James Madison was actually not such a strong proponent of religious liberty as he claimed to be. And he said, in the Virginia Ratifying Convention, he didn't fight for a Bill of Rights. And if you elect me, James Monroe, especially you Baptists, who are a religious minority, I'll fight to make sure we get a Bill of Rights that protects your religious liberty. Now, Madison had been outraged as a young man to see Baptists carted off to jail and having to preach through the bars. So it wasn't that he was unconcerned about religious liberty. He was as fierce a champion, or fiercer, than Monroe. But he had to counter this argument to win that election. And so he, Madison, reluctantly said, all right, if you elect me, I too will work for a Bill of Rights. He narrowly defeated Monroe, he made it to that first Congress, and he felt duty-bound, honor-bound, to honor that promise to the Baptists. And also there was some political reason for doing it as well. There were still opponents of that Constitution who were now sitting in the Congress and who were agitating for a second constitutional convention. And Madison feared that all of that hard work and compromise of the summer of 1787 might be undone. And so, as a political maneuver, he thought it would be wise for the friends of the Constitution, if we had to have a Bill of Rights, better to have the friends of the Constitution craft it in such a way that it wouldn't affect the powers of the new federal government. And so, in Madison's view, even though it was inappropriate and perhaps dangerous, a Bill of Rights could make explicit what was already implicit in that unamended Constitution, namely that this was a government of delegated powers. And so that's how the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights as a whole came about. Madison pulled together some of the various provisions in state constitutions that had their own bills of rights and sort of boiled them down to a manageable number and introduced them into the Congress and became in fact the ramrod to help get them through and passed by the first Congress. In Washington's phrase, it was thought to be, religion, thought to be one of two pillars really, or two legs we might say, that supported the American Republican superstructure. And religion was one and education was the other. As Washington said in that 1796 farewell address, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that a nation should be moral without religion. He He said, you might find a mind of peculiar structure. You might find an odd individual. And scholars and people at the time thought perhaps he was sort of pointing at Jefferson, because Alexander Hamilton, Jefferson's great rival, had a hand in crafting that farewell address. Minds of a peculiar structure might be inclined to be moral, but you can't expect an entire nation to be moral without religion. This was an axiomatic belief amongst the founders. Even someone like Jefferson, who was religiously very unorthodox, very non-traditional, and in fact was a very harsh critic of revealed religion and Christianity in particular. Even Jefferson said that the firmest guarantee of the liberties of a nation was a belief in the minds of the people that these liberties are of the gift of God, that they are not to be violated without His wrath. So religion plays an important role, I think even a vital role, but it's an informal role. It's a supporting role, as it were.
Constitutional Conversations is made possible by a generous grant from the Fairleigh S. Dickinson Jr. Foundation. Constitutional Conversations is made possible by the James Madison Education Fund.